One of my biggest mentors is Napoleon Hill. Now, all of you might know Napoleon Hill from his book, Think and Grow Rich. But there's this other book that he wrote in 1938 that went unpublished. And in this book, he talks about the two entities that live within every human being: the fear entity and the faith entity. And I'm just going to quote a little something here. It says there's two sets of beings in all of us. One of them is motivated and responds to fear. The other is motivated by and responds to faith. Which lives, which dies, simply depends on which you feed. Do you agree? Right? We operate out of fear. The more we think about fear, the greater that monster gets. We operate out of faith and hope and abundance. Things just seem to work our way no matter what, right? So then, he also goes on to say, though, that the fear entity does not die. The fear entity does not die. It is simply dethroned. And this is important to understand, guys. This is important to understand. This might give you a little insight into why I'm so heavily into self-help and personal growth. See, with understanding how business works, there's a place where you get there and you're there. With self-help and personal growth, there isn't. And I'll explain why. He says the fear entity does not die. It is simply dethroned. However, it walks with you always and is waiting to step in when you operate out of a place of fear, doubt, and scarcity. Every day that fear entity walks with you. Every day that fear entity walks with you. It is not dead, it is dethroned, and it's just waiting to step in when someone unlocks that box. You have an obligation to protect yourself. So Napoleon Hill goes on in this book. Now, this book is an amazing book. In just a moment, since I've got you held captive here, I'm going to play 5 minutes and 32 seconds of Napoleon Hill. In this book, titled Outwitting the Devil, that he wrote in 1938, but refused to release until 2011. His estate released it recently in 2011. Why? Because his wife and all of his kids felt that it would absolutely tarnish their reputation. They were in fear of the criticism they would get from religious leaders, from the school systems, and from the government. That's how potent and powerful this book was in 1938 when he wrote it. In only 2011 was it released by his estate, Outwitting the Devil. And in this book, Napoleon Hill manages to grab the devil by the collar, sits him down in a courtroom, and has so much control and power over him that the devil has no choice but to speak the truth. And Napoleon Hill, in this book, identifies the drifter and the thinker, or the non-drifter. Now, let me preface this before we hear the audio. The devil says, listen, I own 98% of the earthbounds out there. He calls us earthbounds, humans. Right? This is Napoleon Hill having dialogue with the devil. He goes, I own 98% of you guys out there. So Napoleon Hill says, well, what about the other 2%? He says, oh, I hate you guys. You're the thinkers. You're the non-drifters. You have a path to dominate, and you stay the course no matter what. He goes, well, then who do those 2% belong to? He says, my opposition. Right? And he says, well, why don't you define yourself, Mr. Devil? As you're sitting there, why don't you describe yourself? How do you look? He goes, I can't be bound by a body like you. I'm energy. Think of me as the negative ion in everything that exists, the negative charge in everything that exists. And so if there's a negative, there has to be a positive. And that is my opposition. And so he goes on and asks the devil to explain the drifter, define the drifter, the person who just seems to never make it in life. Then he says, now I want you to define the thinker. And to me, this is important because I can identify the me of 17 to 20 years ago, hell, 15 to 20 years ago. There's a lot of truth in the drifter. And today, I can relate so much more to the thinker. But every day, I know that the fear entity walks with me. And so if, Austin, you can play this for us, I'd appreciate it.
Go ahead and describe a typical drifter. Give your description point by point so I can recognize a drifter when I see him.
The first thing you will notice about a drifter is his total lack of a major purpose in life. He will be conspicuous by his lack of self-confidence. He will never accomplish anything requiring thought and effort. He spends all he earns and more, too, if he can get credit. He will be sick or ailing from some real or imaginary cause, and calling to high heaven if he suffers the least physical pain. He will have little or no imagination. He will lack enthusiasm and initiative to begin anything he is not forced to undertake. And he will plainly express his weakness by taking the line of least resistance whenever he can do so. He will be ill-tempered and lacking in control over his emotions. His personality will be without magnetism, and it will not attract other people. He will have opinions on everything but accurate knowledge of nothing. He may be jack of all trades, but good at none. He will neglect to cooperate with those around him, even those on whom he must depend for food and shelter. He will make the same mistake over and over again, never profiting by failure. He will be narrow-minded and intolerant on all subjects, ready to crucify those who may disagree with him. He will expect everything of others, but be willing to give little or nothing in return. He may begin many things, but he will complete nothing. He will be loud in his condemnation of his government, but he will never tell you definitely how it can be improved. He will never reach decisions on anything if he can avoid it, and if he is forced to decide, he will reverse himself at the first opportunity. He will eat too much and exercise too little. He will take a drink of liquor if someone else will pay for it. He will gamble if he can do it on the cuff. He will criticize others who are succeeding in their chosen calling. In brief, the drifter will work harder to get out of thinking than most others work in earning a good living. He will tell a lie rather than admit his ignorance on any subject. If he works for others, he will criticize them to their backs and flatter them to their faces.
You have given me a graphic description of the drifter. Please now describe the non-drifter so that I may recognize him on sight.
The first sign of a non-drifter is this. He is always engaged in doing something definite, through some well-organized plan which is definite. He has a major goal in life toward which he is always working, and many minor goals, all of which lead toward his central scheme. The tone of his voice, the quickness of his step, the sparkle in his eyes, the quickness of his decisions clearly mark him as a person who knows exactly what he wants and is determined to get it, no matter how long it may take, or what price he must pay. If you ask him questions, he gives you direct answers and never falls back on evasions or resorts to subterfuge. He extends many favors to others, but accepts favors sparingly, or not at all. He will be found up front, whether he is playing a game or fighting a war. If he does not know the answers, he will say so, frankly. He has a good memory, never offers an alibi for his shortcomings. He never blames others for his mistakes, no matter if they deserve the blame. He used to be known as a go-getter, but in modern times he is called a go-giver. You will find him running the biggest business in town, living on the best street, driving the best automobile, and making his presence felt wherever he happens to be. He is an inspiration to all who come into contact with his mind. The major distinguishing feature of the non-drifter is this. He has a mind of his own and uses it for all purposes.
How does that sound to you guys? Do you know people who are drifters? Have you been there yourself? I have. How about a thinker? We're all on the path of becoming a better thinker, are we not? A non-drifter.